what exactly is a generation? And why does there seem to be so much disagreement about it? And while we're at it, where does this idea come from that the attitudes and behavior of any given generation just manifest out of a vacuum? Let's take a look at this hooey, this poppycock, and how to avoid being sucked in by it. Okay, this time around, I have 3 sheets of paper for a script. So this could end up being a long video. I will try to avoid that. But let's get into it. Okay, so what is a generation? That's the place to start. The Cambridge Dictionary says, a period of about 25 to 30 years in which most human babies become adults and have their own children. Okay, that seems pretty reasonable. But wait, of course it cannot be that simple. No. So that's a family generation. Generally taken to be, 20, 30 years, somewhere in there. But then there's a male generation. The male generation is 31 to 38 years. But the female generation is 20 to 31 years. What? What? So guys don't start having kids until they're in their 30s, but women start having kids when they're in their 20s. Okay, so that means back in the early 1800s and in the 1700s and so on, the female generation would have started around 12 or 13 and gone to maybe 20. And we would have to consider that a significant cause of death among women was childbirth. So the whole idea that there's a male generation, a female generation, how is that even useful? That just seems divisive, unnecessarily divisive. Then there's this concept of a social generation. That's 15 to 20 years. Okay, so society shifts every 15 to 20 years? I'm really unclear where that comes from, and that is a recent invention by I have no idea who. Never did find out. Then there's the generations that are proclaimed by the authors that I'm going to cite as part of this episode, and those generations are 14, 15, and 16 years. And the 2 examples I want to focus on, they're both by journalists. One is Caitlin Abbey, and the other is Cinnamon Janzer. Now, here's an important point. Both of these people are journalists, and they are writing articles rather than being researchers publishing findings. In the case of Cinnamon, I actually got a response to an email I sent her, and she was clear on saying that the article that I'm going to cite from her was written as content for hire. So she doesn't even possess the copyright. She still has a byline on the article, so it's still credited to her. But again, these are journalists, and they are just citing the research that they did to write these articles. I'm not trying to say that this is what they believe. This is just what they wrote as journalists. And I did reach out to both of them to let them know that I would be referencing them in this episode. And as I mentioned, I did get an answer back from Cinnamon. I have yet to get an answer back from Caitlin at the time of recording, but I might in the next few days. So, let's start with the generations, when they start and stop. And if you look down below, there's the description with the table of contents and everything. And then under that, you're going to see a section called Primary Resources. You will find a link to both articles, the one by Cinnamon, which is, I forget the title. It's about generational differences in the workplace. And then Caitlin's article is, I believe, 7 differences between generations X, Y, and Z. So the length of a generation. Okay, for starters, the idea that a generation is about 25 to 30 years makes a lot of sense. You start out in life, you get to a point where you have kids yourself, and you're having kids usually around 25 to 30 years of age. You can have kids after that, you can have kids before that, but around 25 to 30 years of age. Sort of what most people are doing, the average, the mean. So for Gen X, Cinnamon says that Gen X goes from 1965 to 1980. Caitlin says 1965 to 1980. 16 years. And let me clarify. 1965 to 1980. Well, Conrad, that's only 15 years. You have to count the year at the start. Okay? The year at the start is a year. So, yes, if you add 15 to 65, you get 80. But when you count how many years the generation is, you have to count the year when the generation starts. Gen Y. Cinnamon says that Gen Y runs from 1981 to 1996. Caitlin says it runs from 1981 to 1994. So clearly when they were doing research, they each got different results. Cinnamon says that Gen Z goes from 1997 to 2012. Caitlin says that Gen Z goes from 1995 to 2009. Again, when they were doing research, clearly they found different sources. The thing about it is, each of these generations is, 14, 15, 16 years. So unless people are having babies as teenagers, it's really clear they're using this thing called social generations. And why? I don't get it. I kind of do. There are things that happened during each of these periods that they claim define the generations. Yeah. Claiming that you are defined by things that happen outside yourself, yeah, that's blaming your environment for the things you choose to do. Blaming is in the poop column. Not a thing you want to be doing. So, characteristics of the generations. Because this whole episode is about generation gap myths. So the first myth is that a generation is only about 15 years. No, it isn't. For whatever reason, people want to divide us up by that so that they can divide us up. But a generation is around 25 to 30 years. Because a generation is going from one population to the next population. That means you have to be old enough to have a new population. So in the articles, Caitlin describes Gen Z, which at the time of recording, Gen Z would be 14 to 28 years of age. And in her article, she has a statement that says, perhaps it's due to their inclusive and dynamic attitudes about work, politics, sexuality, and style. I'll be honest, I'm unclear what that means. I'm especially unclear when, okay, so she says their inclusive attitudes about work, politics, sexuality, and style. Really? Inclusive attitudes around sexuality? No. Okay, that's a huge Cranium Ex Rectum thing. Now, okay, there are lots of people that say this is the most inclusive generation ever. Except they aren't. Tell somebody who's in the alphabet community that you disagree with them and watch them explode. Watch videos about the, Gen Z, 14 to 28 years of age, university students. Just watch university students dealing with anyone who presents information with which they disagree. Look at the organization of university campuses. They have enforcement officers to make sure that you are thinking the way they want you to think. It's insane. And politics, inclusive around politics, the suggestion is bizarre. People today vote based on party rather than the person. So, I'm in Canada. Liberals hate conservatives and vice versa, and hate New Democrats. In the United States, Republicans hate Democrats and vice versa. In Britain, the Tories hate Labour. You know, if you are in another party, then you are evil. You are not simply someone who has a different viewpoint, you are evil. This whole concept of identity politics, identity existence. If you disagree with me, you're challenging my identity. No, I'm just disagreeing with you. And everyone recognizes that. It's just on the things about which they choose to be confrontational, they go ballistic when you disagree with them. In another direction, Cinnamon describes Gen Y, which at the time of recording would be from around 27 to 42 years of age. Okay, so people that are in the prime of life kind of thing. She writes that HR managers can help retain millennial talent by providing plenty of mentorship and career development opportunities for professional growth and advancement. I'm sorry, but age and experience appropriate mentorship is always appropriate. Anybody from any generation is going to appreciate having someone who's willing to help them learn more and become better at what they do. And workplace studies have consistently shown that career development opportunities to learn more and get better at what they're doing, to take on more responsibility, these things are far more motivating to people than pay rises. So I'm unclear why there would be this target on millennials. Now, that said, in Cinnamon's email back to me, she said that this was a content for hire thing. And the reason that article was written is just to boost search engine results, just to help make sales. So, the WorkFest, I think, is the name of the site. The only reason they've even put this article together is because they want to draw people in. It's just an attention-getting thing. They may not believe a single thing that's in it. So, take it with a heavy dose of salt, let's say. So there's this whole idea that, oh, well, this generation will appreciate that, but that generation appreciates something different. Okay, let's start by understanding children live what they learn. You teach a child how to behave, how to think, how to cope with life, and as they go through life, they will use what you taught them. They will live what they learned. And it takes an unusual individual to stop and say, I'm sorry, is what I learned actually right? Is it good? Is it useful? And I will say for myself, I think I had a far easier time being able to make that assessment because what I learned was clearly nasty and engendered a lot of anger in me. So it was pretty easy for me to look at what I learned and go, yeah, I need to change that foundation. But someone who grows up in a basically happy home, mom and dad are there, they're encouraged to do things, and they're taught this is the way life works, this is the way to do things. It's a little bit harder for that person to look at it and say, well, was I really taught the right stuff? And it's going to be harder to differentiate between here's the stuff I was taught that is good and useful, and here's the stuff that maybe needs to be changed and tweaked a little bit. The next thing I have in the script is, this whole idea, and you know what? I'm realizing now as I look at it that I've actually already started to cover it. It's the idea that generations develop their attitudes in a vacuum. They don't. Parents, if you are unhappy with how it is that your child is behaving, and you want to know, why is my child behaving this way? The answer, as much as you will dislike it, is in the mirror. Your children behave the way they're behaving because of how you raised them. You taught them to be this person. Oh, no, I didn't. I didn't do that. Really? Here's an example. You want your children to use clean language. You want your children to avoid using vulgarities. Okay, that's a good thing. Do you use vulgarities? Yes? Not in front of my kids. Do you think they're deaf? Do you think that just because they're down the hall in a bedroom that they are unable to hear you? Or you are outside and they're inside, that they are unable to hear you? Children are uneducated. That's very different from saying that they are stupid. They hear everything. When I was a kid, I used to come out of my bedroom and sit on the stairs and listen to my parents talk. One of the reasons why I eventually got pretty angry. Because they said stuff that was just very unkind. Whoever you want your children to be, you need to be that person. This concept of do as I say, not as I do, does not work. It does not work. And I want to get a little bit more specific. I have a couple of quotes from the articles. So Cinnamon describes Gen Z at one point. Remember, these are folks 14 to 28 years of age. They're just getting started in their careers, and, finishing university and in high school. So there's a thing Cinnamon writes that says, first, they want fulfillment and a sense of purpose from their work. In other words, they want work that matters. Now, I agree that people in Gen Z, even Gen Y, there's a big focus on, I want work that makes a difference. I want work that matters. Okay. Now here's the thing, to every son and daughter out there. So even if you're in your 50s, you're still somebody's son or daughter. To every son and daughter. And I'm going to read it right off what I wrote here. Do you think that because your parents or grandparents worked at a daily grind kind of job, that they did not want work that mattered? Or do you recognize they were doing the best they could to put food on the table and keep a roof over your head? I recognize there'll be a lot of folks today who just don't get this. But the idea of instant communication is something very, very new. It used to be that if you were at work, there was no way for your wife to call you or your husband to call you. You would have to call the main switchboard of wherever you were working and either leave a message or have them transfer the call to you. Now, it was more often leave a message because workplaces used to actually have a rule that said no personal calls during work. Whereas today, I routinely see people carrying two mobile phones. One is a mobile phone for work, and the other is their personal mobile phone. And they routinely do social media and text with people and even take calls on their personal phone while they are at work. And they think that's okay. I don't. I think that is incredibly not okay. If I'm paying you to be here and do a job, then you be here and do the job. not play on social media or play games on your phone or do personal phone calls. You can call me anything you want, because I don't care. But if I'm paying you to be somewhere and do a job, now keep in mind too, I come out of the trades. So I'm thinking about paying somebody to be somewhere and frame a house, be somewhere and put in plumbing, or do electrical work. If I found a tradesperson on the phone with a personal phone call when they're supposed to be wiring a house, they would be just a hair's breadth away from you're fired. And if there's not a good reason for a personal phone call, then they are fired. If they're just on the phone to a friend, or a whatever kind of call, and it's personal, okay, you're gone. Get out of here. And it's not out of any kind of meanness. It's, you're on a construction site. Your head needs to be on the job. Your mind needs to be focused on what you're doing. If you're an electrician, failing to be focused can get you or someone else electrocuted. If you're a carpenter, and I've had this happen on a job, failing to be focused results in a prefabricated floor panel falling through and almost killing the person underneath. Okay? When you are at work, you need to be at work. Your mind needs to be on the job you are doing. Cranium Ex Rectum. Yes, you have a personal life. Not while you are at work. In another direction, Caitlin, in her article, describes Gen Y, and keep in mind, Generation Y would be 27 to 42 years of age. The most common word hurled at millennials was entitled. They were called snowflakes and criticized for needing constant validation. Well, in this video, do you remember just a few minutes ago me talking about children live what they learn? If your kid needs constant validation, it's because you taught them to need it. If your kid is a snowflake, it's because you taught them how to be one. This whole idea that, well, what my kids is not my fault. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. You teach your children how to live and how to behave. And then when they grow up, that's how they live and that's how they behave. And if you don't like it, don't blame your kids. Blame yourself. And if you want them to change what they're doing, okay, you don't get to be a parent anymore. When your child is 3, 4, 5 years of age and you had the opportunity to tell them what to do and to instill in them values, you chose to do something else. Now they're 17, 18, 15, 25, 40. You no longer get to tell them what to do. What you can do is, 1, Cranium Ex Rectum. Face the facts. You taught this person how to be who they are. So start by saying, you know what, I got some things wrong, and I apologize. Here's a PEP and POOP chart. We tend to be focused on poop, so how about we start learning to focus on PEP? And here's a book, The Success Principles by Jack Canfield. How about we read it and do a family study together and see how we can both do a better job? Just a thought. But if your kid is 18 or 27 or 36, whatever age, you no longer have the privilege of being able to tell them what to do. And to say, well, I'm still your dad, or I'm still your mom. Yeah, but they are also an adult now. They are free to do as they please. They are no longer a child who you can tell. You lost that opportunity. You gave it up. And that's the last thing here on the last page of the script. Do you have a problem with a particular generation? I.e., parents, do you have a problem with your kids? Well, perhaps you should have done a better job raising them. any parent, anybody really, who takes an attitude of do as I say, not as I do, is just a fool. If you want your children to tell the truth, then you have to tell the truth. If you want your children to have strong relationships, then you have to work at building strong relationships with them. If you want your children to grow up to be encouraging of others, then you have to be encouraging of them. If you want your children to grow up to be confident, then you have to teach your kids, and this is something I taught my kids. Listen, this is your opportunity to try things and make mistakes. Think of it like being in a swimming pool. You get into the deep end and you start having trouble. I'm going to let you have trouble. Why? Because I know that I can reach out and save you from drowning. I have that ability. I have more knowledge, more experience, more ability than you do. So I'm going to let you make the mistakes. I want you to make mistakes. Get things wrong now so you can learn how to fix them. Versus the parent who requires their child to do everything right. Or more accurately, to do everything the way they say to do it. That's a huge bad one. Let's wrap it up with this. Do you have a problem with yourself? Do you have a goal that you want to achieve? Changes that you want to make? Cool. Yay! There is a playlist on this channel called Value from Self-Help. I suggest watching some of those videos. It will prime you to get value from self-help. It will help you decide where it is that you are, where it is that you want to go, and how to get there. Okie doke. I do honestly, most sincerely hope that I have managed to piss off quite a few folks. I hope you are angry. And I hope even if you're angry, you still have the sense to click the thumbs up button. Because maybe, for the first time, there's somebody in your life telling you the truth. Telling you, you know what, it really is your fault. And if you want it to not be your fault anymore, then you need to change what you're doing. So then it can be your success.